And we're recording.
All right.
Jim, my friend, how the hell are you?
It's been a while.
It has been a while. Well, it's definitely been a while since we've recorded one of these episodes, but I mean, to be honest, I don't remember the last time you and I saw each other in person.
Wow.
Was it beginning of 2020? Maybe?
I
End
think
of
it was the end.
2019?
I think it was the end of 2019. I honestly think it's been that long.
Wow. That's
So
such a shame, but you are looking
Yep.
good, especially with this. I made you grow it back because you told me
You know, I had to shave it off just to make sure that I could and I can. And then I figured I'd grow it back just to make sure that I could. And you know what?
you can.
It's probably one of the easiest things you can do is grow hair in your face. For most people.
Well, you're very good at it. So I'm glad it's back on there. And I'm glad we're back doing another episode of Everything Cyber.
Excellent.
And this is a follow-up to our very first episode. Because our very first episode we recorded in 2020, and it was about dynamic identification and what our thoughts were going to be on how COVID was going to affect identification. And lo and behold, a lot of what we talked about is starting to come to fruition. So we thought we'd revisit this. So for everybody tuning in, thanks again for doing so. Welcome to Everything Cyber, where Jim and I talk about, you guessed it, everything cyber. For those of you who may not know, my name is Sean O'Rourke. And when I'm not hanging out with Jim, I am a cyber liability consultant for an insurance brokerage firm in New York City, which means I prepare companies to be hacked. And Jim, why don't you tell the fine folks who you are and what you do?
So again, thanks, Sean. Jim Mottola from Porzio Compliance Services. I'm a VP of Data Privacy, Security, and Investigations. What that basically means is that when you have a problem, you call me. And any problem you have, I don't care if it's physical or it's investigations or it's cyber, it is all digital. Everything we do is digital, it seems, from data privacy perspectives, but also from just a data discovery perspective. And then, yes, incident responses. So we serve a lot of schools and we serve a lot of the mid-market businesses in the New York, New Jersey area. So business is booming.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's interesting you mentioned physical security, because we are actually going to record another episode in a short while about the convergence of physical and digital security, because there have been some really weird happenings in that arena too. So, but that's for a future episode. This episode, we're revisiting dynamic identification, or in this instance, we're really going to talk about COVID passports. And I'm going to put those in air quotes without actually making the air quotes, because we're recording this on March 31st, and just in the last month, things have really picked up in this area. So, Jim, how's it feel to be so prophetic in less than a year?
I wish we could have turned it into actually the dollars. But it's interesting. We were just picking up things in the news that you and I were seeing. We're emailing each other back and forth. And so I kind of went back to the ideas that we had talked about. I think it was last year. Well, it actually was last year, but it may have even been a year ago. It seems it's hard to keep track of time now, right?
Yep.
So we said, I think our premise was, look, how can we have some sort of health passport or health ID when we don't even have a national ID, right?
Yep.
We still have a national ID, and at that time, I think we were talking about TSA rolling out with states the real ID.
Correct.
Right. The real ID was you can go to your motor vehicle department or DMV, and they basically put a stamp, a star. There's two different color stars, as you remember, right? Yep. And then California has their own bear. Right? The bear. But anyway, at the end of the day, it's basically I guess a travel validation pass, right? To kind of get you through like TSA. So just as a note, you can use a passport as well. That's an accepted form of ID. So if anybody has any questions on this, go on the TSA website, type in real ID. You can. Well, basically, what happened is during COVID, they suspended the real ID. Right.
Yeah, because nobody
Now
could go get it. So
you were waiting on lines for hours just to get your driver's license updated. Remember that?
Yep.
Right. So that was the horror story of old 17-year-olds who were trying to get their driver's license, standing in line for hours.
Yep.
Anyway, so as of October 21st, that's the date, the due date you need to have it done. So, okay. So there's our national ID. We still haven't solved that problem, right? And then we talked about Singapore, which seemed to be kind of way ahead of the curve, where they had actually digital national ID that they were using for other things like healthcare. Well, Singapore is going to use a form of identification, a digital form of identification using QR code and blockchain technology. Hold on to that thought. Okay, for COVID testing. And for, I believe, right. So Singapore is usually, they seem to be very ahead of this. I'm sure there's not a lot of data privacy regulations in Singapore that protects people.
Right.
So they kind of can have.
There's a caveat to all of this in terms of that.
They can have at it. They can pretty much do it. It seems like they can pretty much do what they want, and they're very technology. They're ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
So where does that kind of leave us now, right? And I'll get into this. Certificates, travel certificates for COVID-19 testing certificates. If you want to get on a plane from London to New York, you got to get tested. You got to have a certificate. Well, guess what, Sean? These paper certificates, some of them are actually been counterfeited. Go figure.
Oh, come on.
Seriously.
Now you're giving me a bad impression of the human race.
and even some of the digital certificates with QR codes. Have been counterfeited, which I'm going to kick to you, because remember when we used to go to concerts and you get your tickets online? Right, there was instance of fraud then. So why is the QR code not with blockchain technology? Why is the QR code vulnerable itself, even digital form?
Well, I mean, anything technology-wise, let's put this out there. You and I both know anything technology-wise is hackable or counterfeitable. Now, blockchain does throw a little bit of a difference into there. If it's implemented and used right, it does. But the QR code can always be scammed. I mean, it's just, all you have to do is put on a phony QR code and you actually get somebody to take the picture. And instead of going to get your vaccination validation, you're redirected, just like you would at a spoofed website. You're redirected to something else that installs malware or what have you on your device. And people, I mean, when you look at a QR code, how are you going to notice if there's a subtle difference to the code to where it's really not for a travel voucher to say that you were vaccinated or that you've tested negative, and it's really to go to a malicious site? There's no way to visually tell that the QR code is different. So that is my first and foremost, is that you're just looking at a QR code. It's just like a barcode scan, and you don't have those things memorized. I certainly don't. The only two that I do have memorized are for apples and bananas. And so from that perspective, I'm not a big fan of it. As you and I talked before we hit record, as we are wont to do, I live in New York State, and New York State now has a new app that you can track your vaccination status and your COVID testing status, called Excelsior. And I don't know if New York got to name that or if it's sort of what the name's going to be, because as you highlighted for me, it's built on IBM's digital healthcare platform. Which is supposedly built on blockchain and encryption, but there's no way to know what happens or what the app is tracking or what happens to your data once it hits the IBM blockchain. So just like Singapore, everything is sort of up in the air as to what happens with these apps and where you go from there. And do all 50 states do something different?
Well, it's just not every state, right? I mean, even in some of the research that I did, you know, it's even cruise lines, airlines, right? Ticket, I think it was either Ticketmaster,
Yeah.
right? Everybody's trying to figure this out. Are they going to use the same app, different apps, right? Like you said, how secure is it going to be? A QR code is pretty straightforward, is that you can even, like, because if I had my, if I could take my QR code, and why couldn't I just send it to you and you could use it, right? What's the difference? I mean, I don't know what scanning devices they're using to validate it. I mean, when you were traveling on Amtrak, you could travel with a QR code as your ticket. So apparently the QR code is hackable, is what compromised. It seems like the step by blockchain technology it appears to be more secure. But I
Yes.
just think there's going to be a diffuse approach to this from different organizations, different states, different countries. And how do we even, validate not just that you've had a test, but what about, like, if you had the Sputnik 5 test, or vaccine? Are we gonna, is that acceptable to enter the US?
Right.
Right. I mean, this is the problem, is trying to validate this, from just not even a technology standpoint, but from a point of, delivery standpoint on what it was that you were even given, and have that information be correct, accurate, and the whatever vaccine you have. Suppose one vaccine doesn't work with a variant. Suppose the Pfizer one or the Moderna one is has less efficacy.
Right.
I mean, I think we're getting somewhere. I just don't know where.
Well, and that was the conversation that we had originally last year. I'm glad you pointed out that it was last year. But it was, everything is a bit disjointed. So when we were recording our initial episode, that was during the Trump administration's response to COVID, and that was in the beginning. In the beginning of it. I think we recorded in May or June.
Yeah.
And in that regard, it became patently obvious that they were going to leave it to the states to determine how to deal with the COVID. And even in some of the states, they left it to some of the cities, in some instances, to determine what they would do and how restrictive they would be. And the federal government was going to focus on vaccine and then getting the vaccine out and whatnot. Under the Biden administration, it seems like it's more of the same. They're leaving it up to the states to figure it out, which, as you and I know and talked about previously, means there are going to be 50 different solutions. Just because New York State was the first one to come out means that California is probably going to want to do their own thing. They're going to want their own bear.
Yeah.
And they're not going to call it Excelsior. And they
Yeah,
may
but
not put it on IBM.
But I think the
Apple
difference,
and Google there.
Yeah, but I do think the difference is that I think what the Biden administration has done is, if you're going to travel on an airline, anything that requires is federal, they have kind of said you have to do X, right?
Yeah.
I think and if you even look at the way that businesses decided, look, Milwaukee, just not picking on Milwaukee, but just say Milwaukee for instance, they've got, let's say they go, there's no mask mandate. But if you're going to walk into a Target, you have to put a mask on. You see, this is where this becomes such a diffuse approach to things.
Right.
And I think the code of vaccinations rolling out as they do, it's in the hands of the state. And look, if you try to get a vaccine for you or a loved one, there is a huge difference I can tell you, between Florida and New Jersey.
Right. Yeah.
It's just, again, it's a different approach. So you kind of have to know each system. Are we going to wind up, and again, we talked about this last time, this whole states' rights thing, man, it just always pops up. It's a strength, and it's really interesting thing. The federal government, how does it really work? So I don't know. If you're traveling on an aircraft and you're leaving the United States, you're going to have something.
Right. Yep.
If you're driving from Wisconsin to, I don't know, Maryland, you're going to pass through a couple of states there. No one's going to stop you.
Yep.
But if I'm driving from Italy to Switzerland, to Austria, if I'm in the EU, yes, no, maybe. I mean, even Switzerland is kind of its own cutout. So
Right.
these are the types of things that I think are going to happen. And what is it? Remember those yellow? Did you ever get one of those yellow international certificate of vaccination or prophylaxis cards?
So I never went to a country that I needed that. So no, but I know you have, because we talked
I
about that
had.
last time.
And sometimes you couldn't travel to certain places in Africa unless you had it. I think it was yellow fever inoculation. Right. So you'd have to show up with that card when you
Yep.
checked in or at customs. Right.
Well,
and it's a paper card.
Yep.
It's no different than the CDC card you get when you get your vaccination now.
Yep.
That's really, so this is kind of where we're at, man. Where is I guess the question is, can technology solve this problem? How do we protect the information? And how is it going to be deployed in a practical way? I know you have the answers to all those questions.
Oh, thank you very much. Put them on me. What did I do to deserve that? Actually, I do have thoughts, as you know. I always have an opinion on something.
Okay.
But as to whether or not technology can solve it, no. That's just not
Really?
the way it works, because technology is when it comes to technology and politics, they're like oil and water. They don't necessarily play nice together. That's why I think it was a mistake, New York rolling out Excelsior. New York didn't even roll it out. They just dropped it. They said, boom, hey, surprise, here it is. And that was the article I sent you, because somebody had sent it to me because I hadn't read the news yet. He had sent it to me at like 6:15 in the morning, saying, hey, didn't you, or you would find this interesting. That was the topic of his email. And me, at this point, I am loath to download apps on my devices. There's so much going on. It's not paranoia. It's just me being a little bit diligent and circumspect on what's going on my devices and how people are going to be able to find me. And I think that's the problem and the mistake New York made. I know they wanted to do it so that they can reopen things, because you're going to need it. You're either going to need your vaccine card, your testing negative card, or this app to get into Yankee Stadium, Citi Field, Madison Square Garden, any other venue that you go to. And now the venues are going to have to validate them like they do the driver's license.
But are the venues validating them, or again, I think Ticketmaster is also looking at some solution. So this is, again, the competition, right? Is it state mandated? And I know you've lived in New York City for a while, and there's, as you can imagine, you may have heard, there's a little bit of a rift between the city and the state. The governments of both of those two.
You mean our mayor and our governor don't like each other?
I never picked up on that.
Yeah.
But I think you have lots of competing interests in New York, right? And we have a lot of powerful businesses and corporations that want to put people in seats and want to do things. So again, we've got this approach. So I'm still waiting for your answer. I mean, what's the solution?
Pen and paper. You know what?
Nice.
Yeah. No, but that's not the answer either, because again, the app is probably going to become the default, because it's going to be harder to counterfeit than pen and paper. I mean, look at New York City public schools. All kids have to be vaccinated, or you can't go to a New York City public school. There's no religious exemption for it either. You're either vaccinated or you're not. And if you're not, then you can't go to New York City public schools. Rutgers University in your home state announced that starting for fall classes, in-person fall classes, all students who want to attend in-person classes will have to be vaccinated on there. And so I immediately thought, well, there goes a dozen to 2 dozen to class action lawsuit against it. But then it's a state university, so it has a lot more leeway than the private schools. I think the only thing I can tell for sure is that we're gonna have a follow-up to this conversation. Every week we could, every day we could.
We're going to, because now, as we've seen this rapid deployment of some solution, right? And I mean solution, which could be technology or
something
paper-based, which is still technology. Paper's still technology, or you print something on it. It's in essence, this is not like some guy with a book saying you've taken the exam, and we're beyond that. The information is somewhere, right? Even if I have a CDC shot card, the information exists somewhere. Right.
Yeah.
So let's just say it's all digital, it's all cyber, it's all up for grabs, it's all able to be compromised.
I agree.
All of it, right? So what's the least? This is always the question. What is the most secure? This is coming. What's the most secure and the most effective as far as a form of ID? We've got to find that middle ground. What's the least, right? The least vulnerability and the maximum usability.
So if you're asking me this right now, I'm going to bite my tongue and swallow my pride and say it's going to be the app. As long as the only piece of information on that app is my name and my vaccine or COVID testing status. If those are the only two pieces of information on there, then I'm fine with that app.
Well,
but
as you should.
How
is that going to happen? Because what Singapore did is now you can use that app. You can use that app and that information to access their healthcare system.
Yes.
Which, look, we know that the healthcare system is, in the way information is shared, it's kind of crazy. Why, if you're in Milwaukee and you need to see a doctor, you have to call wherever to get your records, and how they would not
sent to you sometimes.
Right. And this is why people wear things around their wrists to say they're allergic to this or that or blah blah blah. Because again, this is another use case. Would it be better to know if, God forbid, something happened to you, that you're allergic to a certain drug? It shouldn't be, versus protecting your personal information. I think this is exactly the crossroads that we're in between, for people making these decisions personally themselves. And healthcare is a personal decision, but when it affects other people, that the public interest taken, this is far beyond what you and I even talk about. But this is the same thing with data. It's the same thing with data. When should my data be shared? When should I give that right of the data to be shared for the public interest, or for me to be able to move around the country?
Right.
And what form should it be in? That's the question we're always talking about. What form should it be in? Blockchain, QR codes, something else? I don't know.
Well, and we should give people I want to give people sort of a context on blockchain. Blockchain is essentially, what it means is that instead of one single server or one single machine holding all the data, there are 1,000 machines with the same copy of that data. And any one of those machines will validate, all those machines have to agree on what that data says. And by doing so, what you're trying to do is, it's called a distributed ledger, because they use bookkeeping terms to describe it to a certain extent. But what they want it to do is that they want it to agree with each other, so that if I change data on server 998 and it doesn't agree with any of the other servers, then they're going to know or surmise that that data has been compromised and is not the accurate data. The other reason is that it's harder to change data or steal data that's secured across, or it's supposed to be harder, that's secured across 1,000 different machines that you might not know which of the machines are, versus one machine where you know where it is. And so that is the concept of blockchain, and that's why they claim it's more secure. It is in theory more secure. It's just not been put to such an expanded and broad usage like we are talking about, to where you can really prove it in actuality. Because most of the security testing that is done now, either it's white hat, gray hat, or even the black hats breaking into everything, is all based on what the current systems are. And if you're in the crypto market, you know a lot of these wallets can be stolen pretty simply. North Korea does it to South Korea almost on a daily basis, and is stealing the crypto right out from under their noses. So, and all crypto is built on blockchain. So that means there is a way not to hack the blockchain, but to hack the access to the blockchain. And
Right.
so that's why I'm always loath when somebody brings it up. Blockchain's the answer to everything. Encryption's the answer to everything. Everything is hackable. And that's why my thing is, you put those two pieces of data, I don't care. I'll wear a sign over my head that says I'm either vaccinated, I've tested negative, and what have you. That I don't really care about. But when you start aggregating all this other data, so far nobody's produced anything that would make me comfortable enough to say, yep, I'm willing to carry that around with me.
Yeah, and I think this leads into some of the other conversations we're having, we probably will have, and regarding, we had kicked around the idea of doing like a surveillance society type of a conversation, right? And I think if you look at the value of healthcare data itself, not just from the theft and using it to leverage for healthcare services, but as a source of information to use for research and development of certain drugs and things like that, that has really been something that has been come to the surface lately. Mm-hmm. And what a great advantage it would be, because you and I both know how data is so important to making business decisions about whether it's a therapy or a vaccination. It's huge, and that's drug companies spend billions of dollars and years of testing and research to produce what was produced in less than a year, and things like that. So yeah, I agree with you, and I think this is going to get interesting. I think I'm definitely going to continue to pay attention to this, because it's going to affect what we do as we start to move around the country now, mm-hmm. and do things and try to get back to whatever that normal is, to go to a game or a concert or what have you.
So let me ask you, what are you going to use? Let's say you want to go to a Giants game, football Giants, at the MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. And they say you're going to need proof of either vaccination or negative COVID testing. Are you going to use a paper document? Are you going to use an app? Or are you just not going to go?
Depends who they're playing. Depends on the weather. Okay.
Let's say beginning of October, and they're actually 4-0 and playing for first place in the NFC East.
Given the history of the NFC East, 4-0 might win the division.
Yeah, might win the division.
Yeah. That notwithstanding, in the interest of time, I would say I'm going to use whatever's easiest. I would prefer, if I have a physical card, and that's what they require, that you can't just ask for one thing. It's not possible, right? Yeah. I mean, maybe like RJ Barnabas or another hospital may team up with the Giants, right? Like Atlantic Healthcare Systems partners with the Jets, right? Their facility is very close to Florham Park with Jets. They may partner with the Jets and come up with a solution, and Atlantic Healthcare has a pretty big following. But if you're from New York, you don't even know who that is. So for me, I'm going to probably go whatever is easiest. I may just say, as far as the data privacy side, I'm not giving my information to Ticketmaster. I feel a little bit more comfortable with giving it to a healthcare organization.
Sure.
Right. Or if I can walk in with a CDC card that says I've been vaccinated, I'll go with that. I think that you're going to have to provide proof somehow. It's going to be like a TSA Fast Pass. Anybody who pre-validated, this way. If you haven't validated, this way. So it's going to make me make a decision before I go there to have a piece of paper or something. That right? If you're going to a Giants game on Sunday, please make sure you check in like you're checking into a flight beforehand.
Yes.
Because it's hard enough to get people through physical security checkpoints with clothes on, right? Because now everybody's got to be physically screened. Right? Coats, jackets, pocketbooks, clear purses, whatever. And now you're going to check a form of ID. man, it's going to be kind of crazy. Now, they're not going to let 72,000 people into the stadium on the first games because you will have social distancing.
I don't know, because Roger Goodell, the day before, March 30th, at a press conference, says he expects full stadiums for the entire season.
Okay.
I'm just relaying his positivity. His positivity.
There are some teams they can't fill a stadium. But
well, again, after this past year, what have you, I think every team would be able to sell out for a game.
Let's
at least one or two.
Let's see.
Yeah, no, I don't. But, I mean, that's all marketing speak. It's not going to happen because he has no control over the states and what have you.
But I can tell you, having worked on a Super Bowl, okay, in security for Super Bowl, I can tell you that the NFL certainly does have does have a lot of authority. It's a membership, right? Those teams are members.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then you get other things that come into play, like Players Association. I'd be interested to see how local states and cities handle that. But I do think we're going to need something. To answer your question, Sean, I'm going to get whatever I think is the most secure from a source that I trust, and I'm going to try to find the thing that is frictionless. But I just don't see how I could go to a Jets game, a Giants game, a Yankees game, and a Mets game. And, I've been, 2 states, 2 different boroughs. Yes, the city. I don't think there's going to be one thing. It's going to have to be, oh, I got the wrong app, or you need this app. We don't accept that app.
Right.
We can't scan this app, right? That's a problem. People are going to get confused. It's going to be frustrating. And, if the government, I just don't think that the government doesn't have control over the states to mandate this unless you're doing something federal.
Well,
it's going to be it's interesting.
What you just
stuff.
mentioned were 2 states who have a tendency to cooperate with each other, New York and New Jersey. What about states that don't? So New York's got the Excelsior app. What if I go to see my wife's family in Missouri, and Missouri's got what? If it's not the app that's built on the IBM or that integrates with the Excelsior, do I have to download another app? Do I have to, then I have to laminate my vaccination card and keep that, or I have to go and get my testing card and then laminate that to make sure it doesn't get lost anywhere or whatnot. So
plus you're going to need a form of ID to validate that.
Right.
Here we went all the way back to where we began. It's a driver's license. Right. It's a state or federally issued document. You still need a national ID because if I'm going to see a Cardinals game and I've got this New Jersey driver's license, that looks about right. Come on, man.
Well, you mentioned it in our last episode. You said you got a book that had all the IDs in there, but it's just a picture. You didn't get to feel them. You didn't get to turn them around, see their thickness, test them out. So you were trying to go on some visual cue that that looks right, or
right. It has gotten better though, but because after 9/11, the states were mandated to put a barcode on the back that could be read.
Yes.
But then again, I think technology is the answer to a lot of this, but it presents a lot of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, because right now I could share my screen with you, open my Tor browser, and probably go to a website on the dark web that has valid driver's license with those barcodes on the back that will scan whatever information that I decide to put on there.
Yeah, that technology is not very sophisticated, and that's what college students have been doing for years.
Yeah, long before technology even came around.
Before technology, when you were in college, you had to use probably a pencil and a razor blade to change the dates.
I went to a small college. We never got carded. They were happy to take our money.
All right, man. Good stuff always, right? I mean, this is tricky stuff. I'm going to keep an eye on it. I don't think we're going to move to. I'll start my closing remarks. I don't think we're going to move to a national ID this this COVID passport or it's gonna force this discussion again. It's got to, because this is not going to be going away for a while, and I think we're all going to be very sensitive about healthcare issues, allowing people with any types of viruses or flus or whatnot to enter locations. I just think it's going to be so let's keep our eyes on it. I'm going to keep my eyes on it.
Yeah, and it's going to come back also to a point you made earlier about states' rights. States want their power, but states want the federal government to pay for what that power costs a lot of times. And so I have a feeling it'll be a generational thing for a while, but I don't think if COVID-19 doesn't prompt a national ID solution, nothing will. It will take an invasion of aliens or us populating the moon or Mars to possibly get that. But if COVID doesn't do it, then nothing that I can foresee is going to do that. So while everybody just watched us debate this, if you have some suggestions, if you have actual answers or thoughts on this, make sure you put it in the comment section below, because we always want to hear from you. That's the whole purpose of this, is to spur conversation. And we're going to have future episodes on different topics, but we will revisit this hopefully in less than a year, because there's going to be rapid changes as things start to really open up. So, Jim, it was a pleasure as always. I will see you in just a couple of days to record another episode. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in to see Everything Cyber. Make sure that you subscribe, hit the bell and everything so that you get reminded when we post future episodes. And until next time, my friend, I'll talk to you.
Thank you, Sean. Take care.
All right. Bye, folks.